Welcome to Be With Champions. I'm your host, Greg Bennett, and today I have an incredibly open and honest chat with arguably one of the greatest Ironman athletes ever, Chrissie Wellington. Chrissie shares some really phenomenal stories in this chat, and we get a real sneak peek behind the mind of a champion. I even love at one point when she's describing her very first Ironman World Championship title, and she was running down a Leahy Drive to the finishing line, and she could hear these faint kind of boos, or what she thought were people booing from the sideline, only to find out that they were the Hawaiian horns that they do when they celebrate the winner coming down a Leahy Drive. And then as she approached the finishing tape, she wasn't sure whether she should throw her hands in the air or not, because she couldn't remember if she'd shaved her armpits. I love the honesty of this conversation. Chrissie gives so many great takeaways on mental strategies and the process of becoming a champion and what you need to do on any given day. I just simply loved how many takeaways she gave us in this chat, and I just really appreciated it coming on. A quick bit of housekeeping. If you go to bennettendurance.com/media, you can find all the show notes, timestamps, coupon codes, and links there. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe and share it. I'd really appreciate that. I'm loving all the reviews and feedback. It just helps me try and improve the show for you guys. I am listening, and I'll do everything I can to get back to you if you contact me on social media. Enjoy this one. I really did. Before we start, I've got to give a quick shout out to the brands that make this show possible. The only brands I'm working with are brands that provide products that I use daily and truly believe in. These products support my immunity, they help improve my recovery and my focus. First up, my friends at Athletic Greens. I love this company, and I love their all-in-one daily drink. It's become a part of my morning routine. I'm heavily focused on supporting my immunity and boosting my energy and helping my gut health, but I want to do it naturally. And I found that support with Athletic Greens, a whole food sourced green drink that tastes great, and there's no hassle. It's delivered straight to your door. And it's a highly absorbable powder that takes seconds to mix with water, so there's no clumpiness to deal with. I can't believe a green drink sourced from whole foods can actually taste so good. Personally, I truly love it. It's developed from a complex blend of 75 vitamins and minerals. It's packed with adaptogens for recovery, probiotics and digestive enzymes for gut health, and vitamin C and zinc citrate for immune support. So Athletic Greens is designed to help fill the nutritional gaps in your diet. And there's a great offer going on now for you to give it a try. Simply go to athleticgreens.com/Greg to claim our special offer of 20 free daily travel packets with your first order. $79 added value. And get Athletic Greens delivered straight to your door. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/Greg. This show is also brought to you by my friends at Hyperice. Some of these products I've been using for almost a decade. Makers of the award-winning Hypervolt, the world's most powerful percussion massage device featuring Quiet Glide technology. Hyperice is a wellness tech company that makes devices designed to help you move better. From handheld massage devices to vibrating foam rollers, thermal technology, and the Normatec compression systems, Hyperice helps you warm up faster, recover quicker, and simply move better. Used in professional training rooms throughout the NBA, the NFL, MLB, the MLS, Ironman, and other professional organizations for well over a decade. Designed to help improve circulation, flexibility, and relieve tension. Get $50 off all percussion devices now, no code needed, and get an additional 10% off with code GREG10 at hyperice.com. That's hyperice.com, HYPERICE.com, and use code GREG10 for 10% off. And finally, I want to give a huge shout out to my mushroom buddies at Four Sigmatic, and they're tremendous supporters of this show. An incredible wellness company that mixes shrooms and adaptogens with coffee, cocoa latte, protein powder, and even edible skincare products. One of my staples is the mushroom coffee with lion's mane. And wow, I just love how much more productive and creative and clear thinking I am. Plus, it includes chaga, which is the king of the mushrooms. Right now, chaga is my favorite functional mushroom. The compounds and antioxidant properties of chaga play a big role in supporting our immune system and maintaining its function. You're probably thinking, does this coffee taste like mushrooms? And I can guarantee you it just tastes like regular coffee and not like mushrooms at all. Best of all, Four Sigmatic stands behind their products unconditionally with a 100% money-back guarantee. love every sip, or get your money back. And of course, we have a special offer for you as a Be With Champions listener. Receive 15% off your Four Sigmatic order. Just go to foursigmatic.com/Greg or enter code Greg at checkout. That is foursigmatic.com/Greg to receive 15% off your order. All right, my guest today had one of the most impactful triathlon careers in the history of the sport. Becoming a professional triathlete in 2007, she went on to win 4 Ironman World Titles, smashing course records and world records at the iron distance seemingly every time she raced. A 5-year career that left a mark on the world of endurance sport like no other. Her resume is just simply incredible. She won an Ironman World Championship on 3 consecutive occasions, 07, 08, and 9, and one on her debut in 07, which is basically unheard of in the sport of triathlon. She wasn't able to start in 2010 due to illness, but regained her title again in 2011 after crashing a bike only 2 weeks previous. She lowered the Ironman distance world record each time she raced Challenge Roth. Her fastest time there being 8 hours, 18 minutes. That was 32 minutes in front of second place. There's too many highlights to go through in this introduction. Just an incredible athlete, a remarkable human, a friend of mine for many, many years. So welcome and thank you for joining me on Be With Champions, Chrissie Wellington. How are you, Chrissie?
Thank you. The honour's all mine. It's great to have the chance to speak to you and catch up again. It's been a long time.
Where are you chatting to me from at the moment?
We're based in a small village in Somerset, so about 30 minutes south of Bristol in the southwest of England. And it's actually a wonderful day today. We've had the hottest day of the year. Not normally like that, but yeah, glorious sunshine.
Well, I'm in South Florida at the moment, and sunshine's an understatement. It's kind of, I've never felt heat quite like South Florida summers, actually. I'm like, wow, I've raced in Borneo and Mexico, but a South Florida summer's
oppressive.
It's oppressive. It's next level. The last time we caught up, what was that? It was like Noosa National Park. Randomly, we just saw you running. Hadn't seen you for 5 or 6 years, and there you were in Noosa National Park. Do you remember that? When was that?
Yeah, so that was the first time I ever visited Noosa. So I never went there to train as an athlete, unfortunately, because I'd heard great things about it, and you know, a number of my training partners have trained out of there. And when our daughter Esme was born, about 9 months after her birth, we decided to go on a little round the world trip for 3 months. So we went through the west coast of America, then flew to Australia and New Zealand, and then Australia, and travelled down the east coast of Australia, and obviously stopped in Noosa. I was going for my morning run and bumped into you. It's serendipity, isn't it? I love those kind of sliding doors moments. Yeah. But no, it was great to actually experience Noosa, because like I said, I've heard some fantastic things about it, and it definitely lived up to all of my expectations. Absolutely beautiful place. Yeah, I didn't do that much training when I was there.
No, well, it was random, I think, because Laura and I were only in Noosa for 10 days or something. We hadn't been there for a year, and we haven't been there back since. And but tell me about that trip down the east coast of Australia is something else, isn't it? The beaches and everything. It's just, if anybody's going to pick a trip, that's an amazing one to do. Did you guys drive and camp, or how did you do that trip?
We got an RV. And we travelled down from kind of the Daintree rainforest right at the top back down to Brisbane. And it was just a phenomenal way of seeing the country and stopping wherever we wanted. And Esme being, 10 or 11 months by the time we reached Australia, was relatively portable, although she did learn to walk quite early. So what we thought was a portable baby was actually a liability by the time we got to Australia, because she was kind of tottering everywhere. But no, it was phenomenal to travel the east coast of Australia in the Australian summer and just see some absolutely phenomenal scenery. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful there.
Look, we could keep this kind of small talk going, but honestly, I was doing homework for this, and what I couldn't believe is that your career as a professional athlete was 5 years long.
Probably the shortest ever career.
What was extraordinary is, like I said in the introduction, it's just the impact of your career, that it felt like you were around for forever. And And I don't mean that in a way, it was just like what you did, you didn't muck around. And you're an all or nothing kind of person. I think, do you live your life at like a 10 out of 10 or a 0 for full recovery and never any in between? Is that how you operate?
You got me figured out.
Because I mean, I doing the homework and I touched on a few of your highlights in up above. You started your professional career at 30, and I need to know, how did you get to the point of being 30 and then sort of pulling the trigger and going all in? So what I want to do, and I've done it with numerous guests on this show, I do want to just wind the clock back, because how does somebody that doesn't look like they've had a triathlon or an athletic background or endurance sport just come on to blast the world, change, I think, women's racing beyond what we've ever seen before? The impact was just incredible. So let's step back. Let's take me back to how it all began. And when did you first fall in love with endurance sport, and what kind of a background in sport did you have before that?
Yeah, I think you're right that I took a slightly unconventional path to professional sport. It wasn't a stereotypical journey in that I grew up as a youngster aspiring to be a professional athlete or indeed a professional triathlete. It certainly wasn't like that for me. I was always very driven, determined, very competitive, very kind of obsessive in everything I did. But I channeled all of that as a youngster into academia. So all I aspired for was academic excellence. And sport was something I very much did for fun, for the social side of things. So I joined the local swimming club, but I definitely never fulfilled any kind of potential I may or may not have had at that stage. I wasn't racing at even county level in the UK, let alone national or global level. And then I went to university, and as many people do, found socializing to be much more preferable to swimming. So I joined the swimming team. I drank for them quite well, actually, but I wasn't very well known for my swimming prowess. And then so this is going to be quite a long story, long drawn out story, so bear with me. But when I graduated from my undergraduate degree, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, and signed for a law firm in London, and they agreed that I could go traveling. So I bought a round the world ticket, started off in Africa, and I saw some amazing, incredible, beautiful things. But then I also saw abject poverty and, deprivation at a level, at a scale I've never seen before. And it ignited this fire in me, and I started to question my decision to go into law. And I spoke to my friend, and she said, Chrissie, look deep inside yourself, work out what your passion really is. And Greg, I'd never done that. I was always following a path that I thought was expected of me. And I'd chosen law because it was a label. It was a vindication almost of all the hard work of, academic strength, if you will. But it wasn't actually what I was really, really interested in. So I did a lot of soul searching, introspection, a lot of listening, a lot of reading. And I realized that I wanted to follow a different path, and that was international development. So I did my MA in development economics. And that's when I started running. But it was almost as a mental respite from the stresses that I put myself under academically. I needed this release. And I wasn't a runner, in inverted commas. I got very red when I ran, so I got embarrassed. So I ran very early. And I just discounted running as not being for me. And then I spoke to my friend, and she'd run the London Marathon, and she'd had a heart defect. And, as we do, we're inspired by all these amazing people around us. And I was so incredibly inspired by her that she'd run the London Marathon. And so I entered the London Marathon and then trained in a quite unknowledgeable, obsessive way. And I ran the London Marathon in 2002. And in answer to your question, I think that was when I developed a passion for endurance sports. Definitely not triathlon, but endurance sports. And I realized through running that, how much I enjoyed it. And also that I had a capacity for maybe endurance running, endurance activities that I may not have recognized or explored previously. So I started training to run a sub 3 hour marathon, and typically got injured and started swimming to maintain fitness. And then again, meeting someone, a role model, someone that would influence the direction of my life. And he suggested I do a triathlon. This is in 2004. I borrowed all of the kit, did a few sprint distance triathlons, but then I stepped off the path again. At that point, I was working for the government as a policy advisor on international development policy, and knew that I needed to get some experience working in development on the ground. Went and lived and worked in Nepal, and although people think as a professional athlete, I came from nowhere. So, you burst onto the scene in 2007 and you win the World Championships. Every athlete comes from somewhere. So I had a foundation. It wasn't a conventional foundation, but I had a foundation that I think was based on a breadth of experience, I guess, but also the strength, this physical strength, this psychological strength that I developed when I was cycling day in, day out, when I wasn't working in Nepal. We traveled 1,500 kilometers over the Himalayas at 5,000 meters. And it's just, I think it's those experiences that shaped me into the athlete that I became. So it wasn't the case, as is with many of the people that you've interviewed, that they see a triathlon on television and they're so inspired and, from the age of 17, that's all they've ever wanted to do. It just wasn't the case for me. But I'd be lying if I said that I hadn't built this foundation in endurance activities, but in another way. So in 2000, after a bit of, I cycle toured around Tasmania, around some of South America, came back to the UK in 2006, and that's when I thought, I'll give triathlon a go. The first race was diabolical, and I sank in the swim and had to be rescued. Then I decided to get a coach, and I managed to qualify for the World Age Group Championships, which were in Lausanne, that Tim Don actually won. And I watched him from the sidelines, absolutely in awe. I mean, I'm still in awe of Tim Don, but, in awe of his performance. I remember also watching Lizzie Blatchford. And Lizzie is someone I have such incredible respect for, having trained with her since. She is the most phenomenally talented athlete and an even nicer person. And anyway, I remember watching her and being blown away. And I won that race. I won the World Age Group Championships, age 29. And that was my fork in the road.
I love all of that, because it's like you said, the experiences you gained, I think almost more the psychological, the mental strategies you probably developed by being in Nepal, seeing what you did, seeing what you saw in Africa and the underprivileged, and going about and trying to make change in those more poverty-stricken places in the world, that you start to change as a person in a way which is the opportunity that you have when you get back to the UK. You feel more empowered. You've seen that you are somewhat privileged and that you do get to have these opportunities. So on the harder days, did that then affect you in the way that you were able to, your attitude of gratitude? Did that have you move forward like that?
Really interesting. Yeah. Really interesting question. We're motivated by many things, many carrots, many sticks. But for me, I just felt incredibly blessed to have the opportunity presented to me at a relatively older age for a professional triathlete to make a career out of a sport. But I was motivated by this opportunity to gain a platform and a voice. And that was always really, really important to me, to use sport as a vehicle, because it is quite a selfish, self-absorbed pursuit, isn't it? It's all about you and your goal, but we can all do things with it. And some might do it to raise money for charitable causes, to speak about different causes, become financially secure so they can raise a family. All of those things are valid reasons. For me, it was, of course, an opportunity to compete against the best in the world and to travel to some phenomenal places and to see how good I could be at something. Of course, all of those things motivated me. But I was also motivated by the opportunity, like I said, to gain a voice. And my first coach, Brett, who you obviously know well, could read me like a book, and he tapped into those motivations. And I remember him very clearly at the start when I first started training under him and was questioning why on earth I was committing myself to this kind of selfish pursuit. And he said to me, Chrissie, just you wait. Through your achievements in the sport, you can achieve more out of it than you could ever have imagined. And that was incredibly insightful, but very clever in that he was tapping into those really deep motivations that I had. And that ignited a fire in me, because I thought, yes, there's a real point to this, and his prophecy to some extent came true. And even though we're in a minority sport that's becoming more mainstream, you do have a voice and you do have a small platform.
It's incredible, the insight that he had, the ability to see that you were struggling with the concept of it being somewhat of a selfish sport, that you need to be all in focusing on yourself, and physically, mentally, emotionally, it's all of that. It is consuming, especially if you're trying to be the best in the world as you were. And, for me, that wasn't a difficult task. For you, it sounded like it was a harder thing to take on. And I know for my wife, Laura, it was also a more difficult task, going kind of, well, what's really going on here, and why are we doing it? And I think
very different, Greg. It was a very different life. I think if you've grown up doing that, it's your normal, right? But for me, it was just such a different way of being. But gradually, yes, it became an all-consuming occupation, maybe to my detriment sometimes, in that I couldn't see the wood for the trees sometimes. But yeah, initially, it was just such an alien environment to be in, and an alien way of living for me. But I think understanding your reason why you're doing something can be the real, give you that real empowerment, and drawing upon it being not just a selfish reason, but I want to be able to have this platform, and whether it be charities, whether it be women in sport, whatever you were working towards, which I know you worked with a number of causes, and I think have been really recognised for that in the UK. You now were awarded an OBE from the Queen, which I think it goes. What are the titles? I can't remember, but you're on your way to knighthood, as far as I can tell. And it's quite an honor to be recognized for not only what you did within the sport, but then what you did with the success you had from the sport. But I just want to keep tapping back into your travel up to becoming a professional triathlete, because I think it is a fascinating story. When you first did that marathon back in 2002, was that when was it that you were kind of like, I've got some natural ability, I'm pretty strong at this? Was that race? Did you get an indicator that I am a kind of a natural athlete, and perhaps I have something here to give? I ran on that day. I ran 3 hours and 8, but I would never want to imply that I am a world-class runner. I'm not. I wasn't, and I don't think I definitely never will be. I don't think I ever thought that I could become a professional runner. It was really at the World Age Group Championships in Lausanne. that I realized that I had the potential to compete on a global stage, but only ever with an eye on trying to qualify for the Olympics the next year. And that was a incredibly long shot, knowing how deep the British women's field was. It was an incredibly long shot. But for me, I didn't even know what an Ironman was at that stage. It didn't even cross my mind that I would become a professional triathlete and focus on Ironman. And it was Brett that suggested / kind of strong-armed me into, first doing outdoors triathlon, which is a rite of passage for the majority of his athletes. And then very soon after doing Ironman career. But yeah, in answer to your question, it was the World Age Group Championships that made me realize that at least at the amateur ranks, I could be the best in the world, but and that it would be remiss of me not to seize the opportunity to see how good I could be as a professional athlete.
And was it at that moment after Age Group Worlds that you kind of, when did you start sort of sourcing out to find the best coach you could find and decide to sort of pull the trigger and go all in? Was it?
Oh my gosh, what a difficult decision it was, Greg.
Leaving a full-time job and all the securities of it.
I was so apprehensive. I was so scared of what people would think of failure, whatever failure meant, because I didn't know what success would look like in terms of professional sport, but scared of failure, scared of what people would think, the unknown of a new sport, the unknown of a lifestyle as a professional athlete, and yes, losing the security of a career, and a career that I really did love. And it was my coach at the time, Tim Weeks, who knew Brett, suggested that I do a trial week with Brett. As it happens, Brett had been on the sidelines of Lausanne and had seen me race. I said that I could go to his camp in Lausanne in Switzerland for a week in January. I mean, after New Year's Eve celebrations, like the week after I was out in Lausanne, basically on trial for a week with Brett. And it was him giving me the nod that made me realize that I needed to take that step. And you never want to look back and think, what if? You never want to be left wondering. And if you're presented with that opportunity, like I said, it would have been absolutely remiss of me not to seize it. But I gave myself a year. I said to Brett, look, I've got enough money to survive without any prize money or anything for a year. So he threw me into every race. I mean, I did a race in the middle of Bangkok. I was swimming in the river in the middle of Bangkok because it had £1,000 prize money. And I'm swimming, through dead cows and, dog turds and probably a few dead fumes and chemical effluent and all of this. And you're swimming through it. And I won that race. I won £1,000. But again, he's very clever, maybe not necessarily in throwing me into those kind of conditions, but in terms of enabling me to develop that financial have that financial stability to then believe that I could make a go of it.
Because they're like little pats on the back. I'm not saying it's all about the finances, but I know in my own career it was a little bit of the finance, and the success was a little pat on the back. It was a little measuring stick. It wasn't so much about the money. It was just saying, okay, you're on the right track. And it was that little bit of, it helped you with that confidence going forward. And that was, so once you'd started going with Brett, you started having these successes in Asia, and then I think you went back to Europe then, I assume, for that summer of 2007. Was it still focusing on the Olympic Games, or when did it start to become, okay, I'm going to do Ironman and I'm going to become a long course athlete? Because, obviously 2008 came and went, but here you are, Ironman. Yeah.
So I was blessed to train with some of the best, if not the best athletes in the world, Olympic distance and an Ironman athlete, especially on the female side of things. And I was very much focused on Olympic distance training in terms of volume. And I wasn't, and I, throughout my career, remained so. I wasn't a high volume athlete. So what was interesting is that I don't think I ever trained specifically for an Ironman in a conventional way. I wasn't doing the training that the likes of Hilary Biscay or Bella Comerford now Bayliss or Belinda Granger were doing. I was doing more, a program that was more akin to Nicola Spirig, for example. But that was sufficient for me to race well at Ironman. Over time, that program was honed, the volume increased, but I don't think there was ever a step change between me saying, actually, Olympics are off, volume increases by 10 hours a week, we're now on an Ironman program. What happened was I did a few Olympic distance races. I did relatively well, but the field was not deep at those. And Brett and I realized that my swim wasn't strong enough. I just wasn't capable of coming out in the front pack. And to be honest, I didn't necessarily enjoy that aggressive battle at the start of, an Olympic distance race. I mean, obviously there's a bit of fisticuffs in an Ironman, but it's not the same as in an Olympic distance race. And that didn't suit my personality. And you know me well enough to know that I am totally incompetent bike handler. Totally. I'm an absolute liability. And so again, riding in the pack, sitting on a wheel, I was rubbish. Absolutely rubbish. It just didn't suit me. Square peg, round hole. And it was, again, Brett that said, just enter outdoors triathlon. So we did that. And then a few weeks, maybe a month later, I was out racing Ironman Korea. And like I said, there wasn't a step change in my program to prepare me for that. And I was such a novice. I sought some advice from the other athletes. I borrowed a bit of kit. I still have Rebecca Preston's race shorts. Don't tell her that. That I actually wore in the World Championships. I didn't even have my own race shorts. So I was beg, stealing and borrowing. I didn't know anything about fueling. So I was kind of cobbling together a strategy based on what other people was doing. I didn't have a TT bike. So I had my road bike just with my regular, training wheels on. So I was very much an Olympic distance athlete racing an Ironman. But again, Brett showed that he could see something in me that I couldn't see in myself.
You've mentioned a couple of people there. Nicola Spirig, just for people that don't know or maybe new to the show, Nicola is Olympic gold medalist from 2012 and silver medalist at the 2016 Olympics, and I think it was maybe 5th or 6th at the Beijing Olympics. So an incredible athlete in her own right. And like you said, you had the best around you to see what they were capable of. So you had a perfect yardstick to understand what the women's Olympic standard kind of was.
It's quite funny, Greg, because the first day I arrived at the camp, it was in Thailand. It was dark. I flew into Phuket airport. I just got a taxi to the training camp. They had these 2 houses. It was all dark. And then there was one athlete, Harry Wiltshire, was sitting there eating a bowl of cornflakes, doing something on his laptop. And I said, "Hi, I'm Chrissie." And he said, "Oh, you're the new girl I'm like, yeah. Where am I sleeping? He said, I think you're in the next house. And he kind of pointed me to the room. And so I kind of creep around, go to sleep in this room, wake up. And then I was told I had to be down down to the pool at 7:30. I arrive and there's this, in the middle of this screaming row between Nicola and Brett, because I was sleeping in Nicola's room. Brett hadn't told her. So she wakes up and there's this random girl in her room, and Brett hadn't warned her that I'd arrived, and they've got a really strong relationship, but they, they wear their hearts on their sleeves, and I was just like, what on earth? What
am I doing here? Welcome.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're comfortable. I'm glad you're well settled.
Yeah. He did. Honestly, Brett did his absolute best to, excuse my French, but shit stir, and just pit us against each other. Oh yeah, I mean, he carved me out, so I was a warrior, and I, ended up not caring what anyone thought of me, but. He was very clever in that kind
I love
that psychological side of things. But anyway, yes, I was absolutely blessed to be able to train with those athletes and learn from them, and pit myself against them, have them as a benchmark, and have them as a sounding board as well.
I love that story because I think it shows a true insight. I think often professional athletes, professional triathletes are almost looked upon as having this amazing glamorous lifestyle of traveling around the world. And I think that one really displays the kind of the reality of almost the day-to-day, the tension within the squads, the arriving at weird hours into remote locations, not really knowing what you're doing. And I mean, and you were so green to the world. Like you said, totally. You didn't even know what an Ironman was. You probably didn't even know who any of these athletes
No,
were.
You're right. I didn't. And in that way, I probably disrespected them. And I remember riding with Harry again. And he said to me, Chrissie, do you know what half wheeling is? And I said, no. And he said, it's exactly what you're doing to me right now.
Pissing me off.
And it's annoying the hell out of me. I'm so sorry. But in a way, yes, I mean, we can get to Hawaii now, but it was that lack of deference that I had that probably put a lot of backs up, because I wasn't a historian of the sport. I've listened to your interview with Macca and many others, and they know the sport inside out. They can, cite all of the epic battles and recount them. And it just wasn't like that for me. And maybe I came across as arrogant or disrespectful in that way, because I just didn't know who these personalities were, and I maybe didn't appreciate exactly what they'd achieved either. And
yes, but in fairness, I think it just was. I mean, I and you mentioned Macca and Crowy's another great interview. Two good mates of mine that haven't always got on together perfectly, but they're both incredible athletes on their own right, and two guys that I think I enjoyed racing with or even rooming with at different events and races. And even today, they tell stories of whatever. In the late 80s, Greg, you did that, or remember this in that 92 race. I'm like, I don't know whether you're making it up or if it's actually real now, because my memory is so foggy when it comes to the history of the sport. But Macca and Crowy are both encyclopedias when it comes to knowing every detail of what every single person did. If I had Chris McCormack sitting with us right now, he would be able to break down everything you did in your career, every time split, every result.
Oh, yeah, more so, more than me.
He knows more. That's my point. He knows more about me than I know about myself, and it's actually hilarious. But let's discuss that. Let's discuss your process going into the Ironman World Championships. And I love the fact that you mentioned that you were racing in borrowed pants, because I didn't know you at this point. And I'm passionate about this.
Not many people did, Greg.
No, and I think it was like, but all of us, for me, I was focused on the American non-drafting series. But, come Kona, like everybody else, I tune in. I want to know what's going on. And it's the who's there, and it's the iconic race of our sport, outside of probably the Olympic gold medal. It is the event. And, you know, we're friends with a number of the women that were racing, and obviously a lot of the men that were racing I'd raced against. So I was very into the race. And I'd actually flown there. That's right. We were down there. Both Laura and I had gone to watch this race. And then here is you in I remember it was like a black outfit. I don't think, did you have any logos on your top? Or,
Well, I ironed my only logo, which was the team logo. I ironed it on the night before.
and I'm not even sure that
on a tankini that I'd bought 2 days prior at a shop in Kona, wearing the shoes that I also bought that day, because I realized in Ironman Korea that my shoes were probably half a size, if not a size too small. So I needed new shoes as well.
So take us through this just incredible day, because to get, I mean, it's not only about the day. It's like you're saying, it's trying to get the nutrition and the gear and everything sorted. You'd done one Ironman, and that was the Korean Ironman, which you won, and came 7th overall, I believe. So very hot and humid, tough race career. Anybody that's ever done it, just brutal. You'd done the Alpe d'Huez triathlon, which is just, I never did it myself. One of the regrets I have in my career is that I never got to do it. It's just, and you'd won that. So you'd obviously gone, okay, I've got some strengths and ability at this, but you were such an unknown when it came to Kona Ironman. So I want to know, when did you get to the island?
Yeah.
Was anybody interviewing you? Did anybody talk to you? Did you have any sponsors? Give me that whole rundown, because it is just so random. I love it.
Okay. So let me say, first of all, that I annihilate myself in training. So physically, I was well trained for that race. So I don't want people to think that I kind of just rocked up, just no. on my, borrowed bike, whatever. I trained hard. I've always been really diligent, having had issues with eating, about nutrition and about fueling for performance. I wouldn't say I had a fully developed strategy, but in terms of my daily diet, it's always been something that I've focused on. We were based in Thailand, so I was getting, regular massage once a week. So in terms of training in the lead up, I trained pretty well for the race. But like you said, I was incredibly green. I got my time trial bike 5 weeks before, and race wheels as well, a few weeks before. I flew to the island a week before. I qualified 6 weeks before. So the race, so all of the accommodation had sold out. I wouldn't have even known where to have stayed, had there been accommodation available. But as it turned out, I was kind of halfway up the hill in accommodation that I was sharing with a Spanish guy. So I was sharing a room with a Spanish guy. We had 2 twin beds, and there was a double bed which a British athlete had. The kitchen was outside. I was too tight with money, so I didn't rent a car. So I was cycling up and down this hill, my huge rucksack on my back after going to the shops every day. So the preparations were comedic. If you compare them to, the attention to detail that I paid, in subsequent years. I broke my pedal, my cleat, the 2 or 3 days before. Again, too tight with money. So I went to this car garage and said, look, have you got some really strong industrial glue? And they put it in there. So that fixed the kind of spindle on the pedal. So I was just praying for the whole bike ride that wouldn't break. Like I said, shopping for kit. In answer to your question, no interviews. Maybe one with a British magazine, but they wouldn't have been in attendance. I obviously didn't go to the press conference. I went to the pro athlete briefing and was just utterly intimidated by all of these athletes there. But having said all of that, I think going into the race liberated of expectation was a real blessing. And I've heard a number of different athletes that you've spoken to say that. And it really is, when you can go in and there's no weight of expectation. I don't want to call them obligations, media and sponsor obligations, but they are, but this makes them sound like a real burden when they're not, they're part of the job, but there were no other obligations. And there were no kind of external, extrinsic expectations on me. I had an expectation for myself, and that was to try and get into the top 10. Like I said, I had my benchmarks in terms of the athletes that I was training with, and could see how they'd performed in previous years. So I went in wanting to try and get into the top 10 on the podium, which, is a phenomenal, and would have been, a phenomenal achievement, something I would have been incredibly proud of. I always remember what, again, Brett said to me before the race, and he never gave me an expected outcome. He never said you could win this race. He never said you could get into the top 3, you could get into the top 10. All he said was don't defer to anybody. And it was a really interesting piece of advice, because I think often you go into a race like the World Ironman Championships overcome with deference for the occasion and for your fellow competitors, so much so that it becomes overwhelming, and you feel that you need to compete at a level that you've preconceived, if that makes sense. So I'm only worthy of a top 10, I'll race to that. Whereas his advice to me was, don't defer to anyone. And I didn't. So I race liberated, and I just went out and wanted to do the very, very best I could. And I often reflect back and I think to myself, how can someone without a laser sharp focus on a goal become world champion? And I think it's because on that day I was liberated. I just raced unconstrained. But that's not to say it wasn't a huge surprise when I went into the lead. Honestly. I
love all of that. I love the liberated of expectations. I think that's a fantastic quote, and I also love the quote of "Don't defer to anybody," because I think we all do get that, and I think that is something that you're trying to. I think even when I think back, we've mentioned Mac already, but his imposter syndrome, of when he won his first world title in '97, he didn't feel like he belonged because he was put everybody else up on these pedestals. And so I think that feedback of Brett to you is like, look, just play the game. It's like go and allow yourself to just do the very best you can without, I love that, deferring to anybody. I think that's absolutely perfectly said.
And understanding convention. Convention would have told us that there's a rite of passage that you have to tread to get to the top of the world. And you don't win on your first attempt. You've got to pay your dues. Just a quick mini break before we get back to the show. I just want to remind you guys to go check out athleticgreens.com/Greg. Sign up and get your free 20 daily travel packets with your first order of $79 added value. That's athleticgreens.com/Greg. Isn't it funny? It's that whole deserved thing. I had that Hamish Carter interview I had, and he said, look, Simon Whitfield didn't deserve to win that 2000. But then he's like, the person that deserves to win is the person that wins. It's like this combination of thinking at the time that you have to do this rite of passage, that you have to perform along the way in order to win a certain race. And it's like, no, you get yourself on the start line, and then whoever wins deserves to win. It's in terms of there's no such thing as being deserved. It's whoever wins deserved it. I mean, at the end of the day, everybody prepares the best they can. It's like you said, and I've seen you train. And for all listeners out there, you want to see somebody that just knows how to take themselves to the nice edge and sustain it for a long, long time. It's Chrissie Wellington. I remember, we'll get to that in a sec, but watching you train around Boulder, and even when your body was half broken and you kept pushing, it was like, wow.
she really wants this. So
I don't know
you
if
were
that's
very,
something should be celebrated or.
oh, I know. I'm sure there was a few
But
hiccups
yeah, no,
before,
definitely.
but that mentality
know
of
how to hurt.
the kind of work that you would have put into that '07, my point is that kind of work that you would have done in those months, 6 months block of leading up to Kona Ironman. It looks like you came from nowhere, but I know the kind of work that you would have done. And so you move to the front in that race. You end up holding on to the win, beating Samantha McGlone, who was a friend of ours at the time, who I think was going in very excited to win, and ended up being very disappointed, I think, finishing second. You've beaten all the favorites from Kate Major, Joanna Lawn, Rebecca Preston, and I'm mentioning, I know I'm missing a few, Belinda Granger,
and
Natasha, incredible group of women that all between them had hundreds of Ironmans between them, Ironman victories, and just incredible amount of talent. And here you are, you win with a 9 hours and 8 minutes and change, with a sub 3 hour marathon. You finally did that sub 3 hour marathon, 4 or 5 years after the fact of when you'd wanted to do it. But you did it in Hawaii after a brutal swim bike. So tell me, crossing that line, when nobody wins on debut, by the way, I think there's one or two others, and the names, forgive me, I have to have people they can write me and let me know. I know we've had a couple, but very, very rare does it happen that you win on debut. And especially with no short course background, no other triathlon background. And here you were. What was that feeling like? How was the response of your peers and the media and everybody else around you to that win?
It was surprising, surreal. I was just utterly incredulous, euphoric, amazed, relieved, happy. All of the emotions that you might expect. I remember running down Ali'i Drive, and the native Hawaiians blow into a conch shell, and it's a very dull sound. And I thought people were booing me because they didn't know. Probably I was delirious from having run a marathon, but I thought people were booing me because they didn't want me to win, because they didn't know who I was. Wow. And then the second thought was, oh my gosh, I've got to lift this tape above my head if I shave my armpits. You have all of these random thoughts going through your head. But, honestly, it's a moment that changed my life forever. But I was as surprised as anyone else, but absolutely elated, and very unprepared for it. I hadn't, had to do a lot of media work prior to that. I'd done a lot of public speaking in my previous job, but not of this sort. I didn't have any kind of athletic representation in the form of management. I had one friend was racing, and another, Declan, and another friend, Asker Ukendrup, an amazing sports nutritionist. He was there. So I knew a couple of people. So Asker actually acted as my kind of quasi manager, because I was getting all these business cards thrust in my face, and obviously a huge privilege, but I didn't know what to do. It was the first time I'd ever been offered, sponsorship and endorsement opportunities. First time I'd ever sat in a press conference of that sort. So it was exhilarating. And it was exciting, and I enjoyed every minute of it. But I definitely understand why people would say that they felt like a fraud, or that they, had some kind of imposter syndrome. I was left wondering how I'd managed to win. Because it was unexpected. I thought, well, I've only won. Maybe the others all had a bad day. So maybe it was just, I had a good day, the others, didn't perform to their potential, had a bad day, but, come, the next Ironman, the next race, then, I won't emerge kind of on top. And so I think, yeah, it was an incredible surprise. And I was just left with the question of how on earth did I manage to do that? But what struck me almost immediately was what a wonderful, wonderful opportunity it was. And I had never been to an awards banquet before, of the size and scale that there is at the Ironman World Championships, with 3,000 or 4,000 people all in a parking lot around these tables. But I knew I had to deliver a speech. I'd never listened to any of the speeches that had been given before. I certainly hadn't ever watched races on YouTube, let alone listen to any of the recorded speeches on YouTube. But I knew intuitively what I needed to say and the messages that I needed to convey that day. And I think that's what struck me about being world champion, is what a phenomenal privilege it is and what an opportunity it is to shout from the rooftops about the things that actually really, really do matter. And I just tried to use that platform, I guess, to the fullest extent.
So that was
possible.
almost the first time that, after you'd spoken to Brett earlier in the year or late the following year, was, your reason why. And suddenly here's your first really great opportunity to express why you're doing what you're doing to everybody and start sending the message out that you were hoping to do. And I think that's the incredible thing about you. You've always been very true to yourself about why you were doing it in the first place. Did you feel like when I had Kate Courtney on the show, the mountain bike world champion and World Cup Series champion, she said, look, I won the world championship at 23 and everybody, and then there was the pressure of, was that a fluke? And then, and looking at your resume, she went on to win fairly rapidly thereafter. And then everybody's like, oh, she's never going to lose. So the pressure changed. Did you, in terms of that sort of that first race, was there that feeling of that was a fluke? Was anybody saying that kind of thing? That must have been a fluke. Was there a pressure that came from that? And then the second part to that question is, when I look at, you then go on to win the Australian Ironman, you then win the European Championships the following year, and just did that pressure then change that, hang on, Chrissie's never going to lose?
Yeah, defending a crown is always a different experience than racing as a newcomer. I found being world champion to be really empowering. And of course, there are times when it's overwhelming and you need to lean really heavily on others to take some of the strain or the responsibility or the decision making away from you. But I turned it into an opportunity. So managed the additional obligations as best I could, so they didn't impact on my ability to kind of execute in training or in racing. But very much saw them as privileges and as blessings, rather than as something that would crush me. And it wasn't always easy to do, and you need some really good people around you to sometimes shield you from that. So I wouldn't say I always got it right, but I try to use my position as world champion as a way of elevating my performance. But of course there is additional pressure. There's additional pressure to defend. And when you're doing certain races, there's a pressure that I place on myself and that others have on me to achieve a certain time, which is always an arbitrary measure in triathlon, really. But it's quite a nice, kind of benchmark to strive for. But I try to use those expectations that I had for me and that others had for me as a way of elevating my performance. But increasingly, I needed others to help me. Help me.
I mean, I want to go into the team and the relationships in a moment, but until I do, I'm still just fascinated by this next couple of years where it was like you said, it wasn't always just about winning races. It was about crushing times. It was, I've never seen in our sport such a commanding presence that you had in the women's Ironman field, to the point that when I look at some of your results, I mean, I'm looking at the 30th of July 2008, winning Alpe d'Huez for the second time, which is a long distance triathlon. And you finished second overall. Only one man beat you. Then we go up, Timberman, 70.3. You come sixth across the line after winning the women's race and sixth overall. I mean, these weren't just performances to win races. Was there an element, do you think within you there's a, I don't know if the word punishment is fair, but this, do you enjoy taking
self-flagellation?
Well, yeah. Do you? Is that something that you? I mean, I do. I love that feeling of really taking myself to the knife and just hanging in there. And I don't know if punishment's the right word. Maybe it is. But do you have that? Because you're winning races by over half an hour. You're destroying records during this time. You're changing the landscape of women's Ironman racing. Was that all just to race for a time, or was it somewhat of a punishment?
It was to see how good I could be. I think as you mentioned before, I could suffer so much in training that when I raced, and this sounds really arrogant and I hate to say it, it wasn't as uncomfortable as people might think. So of course it's uncomfortable, but it's as much a psychological battle as a physical battle. So physically, it can be uncomfortable, but I was never at the level of physical discomfort as I was sometimes in training. It's the psychological side of things that comes into play. I just wanted to see how good I could be. And a number of both of my coaches, Brett and Dave, told me to take my foot off the gas. Towards the end of the race. And it's just not in my nature. It's just not in my nature to, cruise to a victory, because then I won't know how fast I could have gone. And it wasn't about the time on the clock, because that's not the measure of success. It's that feeling that you've pushed yourself to the fullest extent possible over 8-9 hours to that finish line. And maybe that's why I had such a short career, in that I perhaps crushed myself in the way in which I trained and raced. It was with an intensity that potentially was, if not physically, mentally unsustainable. I don't know. I've never really thought of it in the depth that I'm now, speaking to you about it, actually. But maybe it just wasn't sustainable, that the way in which I trained and raced, and doing 3 Ironmans, apart from 2010 when I broke my wrist very early on. I had to miss my early season one. 3 Ironmans, trying to peak and be the best athlete you could be for those 3 Ironman races. Takes its toll and requires a level of intensity that maybe I couldn't have sustained. I don't know, because I will maybe touch on the transition away.
Well, I think there's a combination there, isn't it? I mean, firstly, you started the sport fairly late at 30, and so obviously that you've almost missed 10 years. But I do think in terms of the intensity in which you trained, probably even more so than the racing, but you fired a lot of bullets. And if we think about, we have a certain amount of bullets we can fire over our career, you just happened to be on rapid fire. And it was like, we looked at 5 years where these performances, I think we've just started sort of seeing Daniela Riff of more recent years. being kind of your and Mirinda Carfrey, I think, who kind of stepped in, well, in 2010, the year you missed, but then after that, she won a couple of Ironmans. And I think when I look at how the three of you have kept pushing those times, and the records are falling, and even now Annie Hug. But I look back to you, there was incredible women before you. So I'm not cheapening what they did. Paula Newby-Fraser, obviously, Natasha Badman, McKeely Jones, the great champions that we've had in the women's racing. But I do see when you came on the scene that it was like, let's nudge all these performances forward another sort of half hour, 20 minutes to half hour. And it wasn't just Kona Ironman. Like I said in the introduction, your ability at the Challenge Roth, which is an iron distance. It's not under the Ironman flag. It originally was at one time, but now it's under a brand called Challenge. And your times at that event, and you just kept pushing and pushing. And the one I love there in the third time you won it, and you beat your record by 1 minute, and you did it in 8 hours, 18 minutes, and you won by 32 minutes. And what race was I looking at? It was the South African Ironman. Let me see, what year was that? That was 2011.
That same year.
And you went and smashed the Ironman record time. You did an 8:33, and you beat a good friend of mine, Rachel Joyce, who's finished on the podium at the World Championships. I don't know how many times, but excuse me, Rachel, but I think if I said 4 times, I think she's at least been on the podium. Yeah. But you decided to still win that race by 35 minutes and finish 8th overall. So you've only 7 men are in front of you, and the rest of them, as we refer to it in the sport, got chicked. So that mentality of yours to just keep getting the most out of yourself, and I know I apologize for going on here a little bit, but it's that I think is, I would agree with you to some extent that you fired a lot of bullets in that 5-year period. When you decided to stop, and I'll come back and look more at your resume, but when you decided to stop, was it physical? Was it mental or emotional? What was the reasoning there?
I remember, again, at the start of my career, saying to Brett I had the financial resources to sustain myself for a year. But then after winning my first World Championships, I said, I'll be in the sport, 4 or 5 years. And you say I missed 10 years. I think I gained 10 years.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you're probably
do you know what I mean? Like, I think that gave me just a totally different foundation. And maybe every athlete has a 5-year period that they're at their zenith. It's just my 5-year period was the only time I was a professional athlete. But before that, I was just creating this different foundation. I retired because I had the race that enabled me to answer every single question I'd ever asked of myself. And that is, how deep can you dig when the shit really hits the fan? How good can you be? And I answered that question, and I had that battle within myself, and I had that battle with my competitors, and it was my perfect race because not because everything I guess was perfect, because I overcame things perfectly. All of those imperfections, I overcame them perfectly. And I proved something to myself, maybe answered a question that I was always asking of myself, whether I was worthy of being called world champion. And it completed me, Greg. It just completed me. And I knew that no matter how much I could improve in terms of time, how many more victories I may or may not have managed to achieve, nothing would come close to the euphoria and the satisfaction and the pride that I felt at the end of that race. And I knew that however difficult it is or was to move away from the sport that I loved, the sport that, gave me more opportunities than I could have ever imagined, I knew that the time was right to transition away.
I love that answer. I think that's, and just to give the listeners an idea of 2011, I mentioned South Africa at the start of the year. You then went on to win Challenge Roth again for the third time, like I mentioned, in an 8:18 and finished 5th overall, 4 men beating you there. Then you went and I did mention it briefly in the introduction, at the Ironman World Championships that year, you had a crash. Forgive me, but I think it was about 2 weeks before, and it was quite a brutal crash. So let's go through and dissect that, what you're talking about, that the way you handled that race perfectly. Not that it was a perfect race, but the way you handled it. But let's dissect why it was and why it was such a good place for you to stop.
Yeah, so myself and my now husband Tom, we were training as you and Laura out in Boulder, and as you rightly said, 2 weeks before the race, I had a crash. And compared to some crashes that we've seen, especially in more recent years, this wasn't as debilitating as it has been for many other athletes. But nevertheless, I came off my bike. I had 3rd-degree burns down the left side of my body, on my legs. Sorry, I pulled a muscle in my chest, and I couldn't swim, bike, and run. I remember we were training at a pool. I got in. I did a length, and Dave Scott, my coach, and Tom had to kind of hoist me out and carry me like a baby to the car. And that was the Wednesday, so 10 days out from the race. So I deferred my flight. I was supposed to fly on the Wednesday, flew on the Saturday, was kind of in and out of hospital at Kona, just getting the wounds scrubbed. I had an ECG because they were worried a bit about my heart, because I was getting those chest pains. Fortunately, that was normal. I had some great care from Mike Leahy, who does ART, active release therapy, and he's always been a phenomenal support, and was no more so than in the days prior to the World Championships. And I lent heavily on my family, on my friends, on my coach, of course, on Dave for support. Never once did Dave advise me not to race. I know that he didn't think I should race, but he never once said that. I was always, once I was in Kona, determined to start. But I think I came full circle, Greg, back to 2007, where I could race liberated. And I wouldn't want anyone to go into a race, injured. But for me, I could liberate myself from expectation, and also many others may not have had the expectation that I would win because of the state I was in. So for me, I redefined what success would be. And for me, success was to finish. And I have an email from a friend, and he said precisely that. For you, getting to that finish line is a success, and that will inspire everyone. And that's what compelled me to race. And I, as in 2007, raced with, I don't know, I raced liberated of an outcome goal, and just wanted to go out there and do the very, very best that I could. And that, gave me the wings, I think, to achieve what I did. But I went into that race physically and emotionally compromised, but conversely also empowered in some kind of perverse way, because you release yourself of expectation. And again, it's very strange, because you look at other athletes, you look at the Michael Johnsons, who from a very young age wanted to win an Olympic gold medal at 200, 400 meters. And that's what they set their mind to. And they'll tell you that without that focus on a goal, you can't achieve it. And on occasion, I've proven that wrong. And I think it's because you just go out there and you're just determined to execute the very, very best race you can on the day. But having said that, although I was injured, I had this incredible bank of training. I'd had a phenomenal year of training, and I was buoyed by the success at Roth and prior to that in South Africa, which gave me confidence. So, just because you've crashed your bike and you've got surface wounds, it doesn't mean that all of the hard work you've done all of a sudden goes out the window. It's uncomfortable. But Greg, when we race, we expect it to be uncomfortable. We almost embrace that discomfort, don't we? So, I had that residual fitness that I carried into that race. Even though, I had those superficial wounds and, my gait was somewhat
Was there ever a
compromised.
point where you felt like, 2010, for people that don't know, you'd won the 3 years previous, you woke up the morning of the race in Hawaii, had to withdraw due to fairly extreme illness. You might have to tell me exactly what that was.
Yeah, it wasn't. Well, I just felt off. And some people would race. I had a sore throat. I had a headache. I felt off. And Dave said to me, if you woke up like this on a normal training day, would you train? And I'd say no. He said, you have your answer. Other people would race. We saw Patrick Lang last year. He raced with, feeling relatively suboptimal. I chose not to, and then went back to Boulder and had tests, and I had strep throat and West Nile virus. I don't know. I've never been near the Nile, but anyway, I had West Nile virus. Don't know how I contracted that, but anyway, I had various things that explained it. But that was an incredibly challenging situation because you're disappointed because you can't race the biggest race of the year in your sport. You also, there were various accusations flying around about me failing drug tests. Someone said that I was pregnant, which is immaculate conception when you're an Ironman athlete, to be honest. But, so I was dealing with disappointment, frustration, embarrassment that all my friends and family had flown out, that my sponsor had committed themselves to me. Real embarrassment, actually. So a questioning about whether I'd made the right decision, whether I'd let myself down, whether I was a failure, whether I was weak not to start, all of those things. And so I went away, I threw my toys out the pram, and then I knuckled down, got better, knuckled down, and raced Ironman Arizona, which still to this day, one of my most memorable, proudest moments, because I raced with my husband in his first Ironman and he got on the podium. And that was one of the best experiences of my life. But I think also that the experience in 2010 not racing and the self-questioning and self-flagellation that I went through afterwards almost compelled me to race in 2011. I was like, look, you didn't race in 2011. You just get your butt to that start line and you just race. And you're not scared of losing. You just put yourself there. And so I did. And, the rest is, is history. But winning that race was a defining moment in my life. And I said, I think every athlete wants that race that they feel complete. And I think we're often searching for a perfect race. And I think we think that perfect race is the race where everything feels great all the time and nothing goes wrong. You don't get a flat tire, your goggles don't get knocked off, you don't have a cramp. My view is that ain't going to happen. It's
And
a long race.
The perfect race doesn't even have to be a win.
No,
if I look back, some of my
right.
greatest performances, I actually got beaten. But I'm like, wow, I really don't know. I got beaten by the better man, and that was it. But I mean, that race for you in 2011, if you look at your times and everything else, it was solid across the board. Your swim was obviously off because, well, you couldn't really swim. So you're in a different position coming out of the water, but it was also different.
I think I was the only bike left, Greg.
I don't know about that.
I think there were maybe one or two.
I think there's a lot of amateur athletes listening. I'm quite happy with the 61 minute for the 3.8 kilometers. But I know what you mean.
I was just happy to get out of the swim. Someone showed me a video of myself getting out of that. I have a smile from ear to ear because I think, wow, I've finished the discipline that I was most worried about. Because I hadn't really been in the pool that much in the week before. I think I'd done one or two swims. So I was just exhilarated to get out of that swim and just be on the bike.
But I look at that race too, and when we look at the 3 years, 4 years previous, and the domination you had, this race was different because it was a young Mirinda Carfree that basically settled in just a couple of minutes behind you, what seemed all day. Was it a different feeling to be running a marathon with arguably one of the greatest female marathoners we've seen in the sport of Ironman sort of chasing you down the entire way? Was that a different energy that you needed?
Phenomenal. Again, I've trained with Rinny, and I think in retrospect, I never took enough time to get to know her because I always tried to have this game face and this poker face when we both lived in Boulder. So I never maybe let my guard down, and that's something. I look back at my career. There's a couple of things I regret: not celebrating enough after major victories, and really sometimes not letting my hair down and being my authentic self with people. I think I was almost too scared to show the real me and to let my guard down. But yeah, sorry, that's an aside. But yeah, phenomenal athlete, and really, privileged to race against her, and her running ability definitely enabled me to elevate my performance to the next level. But the dynamics of that race are actually really interesting because I've been fortunate to go into the lead on the bike in a lot of the Ironmans I've done, and then retain that lead in the marathon. And this was totally different. So we had Julie Dibbons, great friend of both Tom and I, and she, flew on the bike. So I came into transition sixth. I think Macca could probably tell you, but I think I was sixth. So Rinny was behind me, but there was Caroline Steffen, Leander Cave, Rachel, Julie. Apologies, I'm forgetting one other person. And so I came into transition six, which is a dynamic and a situation that I'd not faced before. So again, that's why I was proud, because it forced me to prove that I could race when I was coming from behind, as it were. So I slowly started to pick people off. I remember on a Leahy Drive on the way back into town, tapping Rachel on the back and giving her a little thumbs up. Unfortunately, I knew going into the race that Julie had a bad ankle. So you never kind of want to wish an injury on anyone. And I was hoping she could complete the marathon. Of course it did. But I also knew that it was doubtful that, her body would be able to carry her through the duration of the 26 miles. So she pulled out, unfortunately. And then I slowly...
Julie had finished third the year before, I think.
Oh, she didn't.
So yeah. She was definitely a contender when we talk about...
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And you've trained with Julie, and there's no one quite like her. I pale into insignificance when it comes to hurting myself. She's just absolutely phenomenal. But again, scuppered by injury. And I slowly began to pick people off, and I had a fast charging Rinny behind me and had to hold her off. I think she came within a minute of me. I don't know if she got closer than that. She came to a minute of me, and yeah, I'm running scared. Who wouldn't be? That pocket rocket up your backside. It's I was just willing myself to hold on. But every race I ever did, Greg, people say I made it look easy. It wasn't. Every race I had thoughts of quitting. Every race was uncomfortable in a different way. But I drew on the bank of memories to help me through each moment. And, we have these psychological strategies. And for me, I've gone with the days where I could break the marathon down into 10K increments. Honestly, I was breaking it down into aid stations or, people in front of me, things like, just anything that I could do just to have that small success and keep putting that step forward. But yeah, that was the battle with others that I don't think I've ever had before. And that was what made that race so incredibly special. But I've never been so annihilated at the end of any race as I was at the end. I was absolutely depleted.
Such a great way to finish your career, though, too, isn't it? It's like you emptied the energy bucket at that race, and for just so you you ran a 2:52 marathon to hold off the fast charging Rinny, who set a marathon record, I think, that day. Maybe was it 20 or seconds? It wasn't much quicker than your marathon there, but it was, the two of you just an incredible battle, and you held off. You touched on a lot in that, and I want to talk a little bit more about your mental strategies, because did you train those? Was that part of your process when we talk about the physical training? Were you incorporating kind of mental strategies, visualizing any kind of affirmations, or did you just kind of allow the physical training to do its part? And tell me a little bit more about that.
The psychological side of things, I think, is incredibly important, because we've each seen our peers train. We know how hard they work. So it's not just about the physical training and all the kind of other detail. It's very much a psychological battle as well with yourself, and then also dealing with all the other, pressures. Probably, sounds too negative, but the additional pressures that you have, and your brain can be trained. You can train it to cope with discomfort, to cope with adversity, to reframe things and see things through a different lens. So to see discomfort, pain, adversity, problems as opportunities, or as signs, as means of learning and as of growing. And I, like anyone else, had a number of strategies in my back pocket, and I never consulted with a sports psychologist. It's something that you have to do in training. Training is about learning to hurt and learning to develop the tools that you need come race day. So I trained alone quite a lot, or in very small groups, because I think you need to be able to endure boredom. You need to be able to be in your own head and cope with that negative self-talk, over an extended period. So that was quite important. Obviously you have the camaraderie of training with a group occasionally, but then also it's really important, I think, that you invest time in training alone. Visualization is something that I did. Not that I'm lying on the bed in kind of a Zen-like state, but definitely visualizing myself in terms of a successful performance, but also, Greg, in terms of things that might go wrong. So I've had a number of races where I've had flat tires, or like I said, goggles get knocked off, all of those things. So I've had lived experience of dealing with those, but also you just need to run through those situations in your mind. So when you get a flat tire, you kind of have that mental, or you know you've got that strategy to deal with it. You've already lived it mentally, if that makes sense. So yeah, visualization, positivity, positive affirmations are incredibly important. So my mantra was never ever give up. I used to write it on the top of all my race water bottles. I used to write it on my little race wristbands, which I still have. I can afford everything. I used to carry a dogged copy of Rudyard Kipling's poem If, and I used to write excerpts of it on my race water bottles. So the water bottles on the bike, if people look very closely at the photos, have got my little Sharpie handwriting on them. And then I'd have one at the start, which I'd then give away to a child on the start line with my writing on. So just those kind of strategies really helped. I think having a plan, so being strategic in the run up to a race, gave me peace of mind. So a written plan in terms of what I needed to take, what kit I needed to have, and when I needed to do certain things. For me, that just alleviated the pressure of forgetting things. So that's a kind of practical way in which you can prepare. Again, breaking training sessions down into manageable chunks. You know, there's a session that Brett used to give us. I'm sure you've done it. That we used to do 4100s, so just over Ironman distance in the swim. So 4100s. I used to do it off 125. So coming in on 120. So I'd get 5 seconds rest. I was like a bloody metronome, just bang, 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 bang. And you go into that session and you think, oh my gosh, I've got 40 of these. So you don't. You just think I've got 5. And then you think, I've got 5 more. And then when you get to 20, instead of thinking, oh my gosh, I'm only halfway, you think, yay, I'm halfway. So it's breaking it down into those manageable segments. And the same is true of a race. You don't go into an Ironman thinking, oh my gosh, I've got to race for 9 hours. You just think, right, I've got to get through the first 200 meters, get to that buoy, get on the bike, do 40K, just you break it down. But I think the most important psychological weapon you've got of all is that lived experience of racing and training, of pushing yourself to and beyond your limits in training and knowing that you can do it. So, like I said, every race I did, I wanted to quit. And then I'd reflect back on the race before when I'd felt that, and I'd think, oh my gosh, thank gosh I didn't. Thank gosh I didn't quit at that point. I wouldn't have won the World Championships. And then so when I think of quitting, I think, think back to that time when, you crashed your bike over a barrier on Alpe d'Huez and managed to win. And you remember those things. And that's a hugely, hugely important kind of weapon in your armory, is to carry that bank of memories with you. So those are some of the tools, but it's training that you can help develop them. And of course there are experts, with many more letters after their name than mine, that can advise on these things.
But that's just absolutely gold, that last 5 minutes. So thank you for that. No, it really is, because I think there's just so many very useful takeaways, whether we're preparing for a race or whether we're preparing for a board meeting, whatever we're doing, we've got a small business, whatever we're doing, there's so many takeaways that in terms of what it takes in terms of the process. But
I think just reflecting back on what I've just said, it implies that I'm operating solely as an individual, as an island, and that is not the case. So I wouldn't want to claim that everything I achieved was down to me and my physical strength and my psychological strength that was developed in some kind of vacuum, right? It wasn't. Everyone around me also kind of helped me develop these tools and honed me into that athlete. So both of my coaches in different ways also developed my psychological strength by setting me a program that tested my limits, that made me question myself, that, made me achieve more than I thought possible. So it was down to them that I could then prove to myself that I was capable. And then that iterative process of developing self-confidence and self-belief that is, all too important as an athlete.
I love that. You've segued exactly where I did want to, before we finish up, I do want to talk about your relationship and your team. And you've mentioned them throughout this episode. Just quickly before I do, you referenced the 4100 swimming that we used to do, and it's kind of become that common. And I used to feel awful, and I knew I would feel awful for 6 to 7 of them, and then I knew after that I'd find a state of flow and it'd be fine. So for me, it was always just, all right, just get through the 7th one, and then you'll find that rhythm. And like you said, I think I was a bit the same. I can't remember my exact time splits, but it was kind of, you come in, I'd have 2 or 3 seconds and be like, touch and go. And it was like that. Okay, you just find that rhythm and away you go. So I was laughing as you were telling that story. I was like, I remember that.
But it's a microcosm of life, right? That you've just got to start. You just got to take that first step.
That step. Don't look at the whole staircase.
And there'll be highs and there'll be lows. Mm-hmm. And that's the beauty of Ironman, isn't it? Of triathlon. It is this microcosm of life with all of the challenges and the disappointments and the pain and the euphoria and the pride and the satisfaction. And that's why it's so utterly, utterly amazing, because you lay yourself absolutely bare and can answer really, really tough questions of yourself.
And then I think that transfer over to parenting, running a small business. I felt like that with the podcasting. I knew nothing about podcasting 6 months ago. But then it was like, okay, well, what's step 1? Start watching some YouTube shows on podcasting and blah, 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 blah. All of a sudden, I wouldn't say I'm an expert. I got a long way to go, but I'm a couple of steps up into the staircase now. And it's kind of like, I'm going. But I had to hit that first step. And parenting, gosh, for every parent out there listening,
I still need that.
we're all trying
about a parent, because
I don't know.
Honestly, yeah.
Isn't it 2 steps up?
Blindfolded.
I know. None of us know what we're doing. Yeah. I'm like, we have a 5-month-old now, and he's still alive. He gives me a smile. I'm like, okay, I've got it. I'm doing all right.
He's still there. So
Yeah. So let's quickly, before, I know I've taken so much of your time, Chrissie, but I do want to quickly finish with the team and the relationships. You've mentioned Brett Sutton. You've mentioned the incredible, the one and only Dave Scott, who's been on this show, who I need back on. Is just a 6-time Ironman World Champion as your coaches. Tom, your husband, and your family. Just let's just tell me about your team, your training partners. Just a couple of minutes of just the importance of them to you.
Yeah, I found it incredibly hard to lean on other people. I still do sometimes, Greg. I'm so fiercely independent, and for me, often it was a sign of weakness to reach out to others and admit that I didn't know the answer, or that I lacked knowledge or information. But then you realize that without those people in your corner, you cannot succeed, or you cannot reach your potential. And you're definitely not an island. And so as I progressed through my career, my team grew, but it was still pretty close-knit. So first and foremost, my friends and my family. And out of anything that triathlon gave me, it was the gift of relationships. Obviously my marriage, but, strengthened relationships with existing friends and obviously my family, but also new relationships. And I just feel so utterly privileged to have been given that gift through the sport. But yeah, so friends and family, my coaches, absolutely pivotal, and very different in terms of their coaching styles. One very authoritarian, very dogmatic, which worked for me for a few years, was unsustainable for me. for any length of time. And I found something different in Dave, which I think I needed as I evolved as an athlete. And, Dave and I had a very reciprocal relationship, a friendship, but a very reciprocal relationship where I could feed into my program and understand and ask questions. And I really, really appreciated him. And as a friend and as a coach, utterly invaluable. And then, massage therapists, we both know Marcus very, very well. And as you've said, often in the podcast, he utterly selfless and committed to each and every athlete that he treats. And you and I were blessed to have him on board. Like I said, Mike Leahy was also really important in providing kind of active release therapy. I didn't have kind of a live-in cook, bike mechanic, all of the, I didn't. We lived that's not an extravagant, it's quite extravagant, but a very, very simple, life. So those are the people, in my corner. But of course, I couldn't have done what I did without sponsors. So sponsors are part of your team, right? And we see it often as an, double-edged sword in terms of, yes, I get sponsors, they pay me money. Oh my gosh, I've got to do a photo shoot and but they're part of your team. They, you're racing with their training and racing with their equipment, but they're, giving you a platform and giving you that financial security that not every athlete has. And so they were very, very much part of my team. And I was and am really lucky to count a lot of my sponsors amongst, really close friends. And they were part of kind of Team Welly at the various races. And to some extent, the media, right, Greg? Because, not your close-knit team, but the media give you a platform, they give you a voice. And that's really, really important for an athlete because it enables you to convey messages and make a living and grow the sport. And so I also see, them as, being important parts of my career, as were my competitors. We were competitors, yeah, but your competitors are in some ways part of the team of people that are enabling you to be the best athlete you can be, right? It means strive together in Latin, right? And that's right, because you're striving together, you're fighting, you're battling together, and you're elevating your performance. So in some way, they're also part of your team, and their victories are also mine. So I was standing up on the stage as world champion, but really all of them deserve, many of the accolades. As well, because it's really important and it's something that I had to learn, and it didn't come easy to me in welcoming people into my circle. Like I said, I found it quite hard.
Yeah, I can appreciate what you're saying there, where you mentioned that earlier, and I did want to say that earlier. As an athlete, I actually found myself training a lot on my own as well, and a lot of that was, I was a fairly competitive guy and I had a bit of an ego and a bit of a chip on my shoulder, and I didn't want to have to compete every time I was out training, and I didn't want to have to I didn't want to have to manage my ego every time I went out. So it was just easier to train on my own. I mean, that changed a lot towards the end of my career, and had a lot more training partners. But you have just surmised so many wonderful relationships. We have a lot of crossover, whether it be Dave Scott, Marcus Mejias, some incredible people that have been in our corner over time, and obviously our partners that we both met through the sport of triathlon, and sponsors and media and everybody else. And just an incredible conversation. I've taken so much of your time, and I can't thank you enough. I know there's probably a lot better things you could be doing on your evening, so I really, really do appreciate it. Just quickly, what are you up to now? And if people want to find more about what you're up to, tell me how they find you. I'm not sure if you're into social media much anymore or if you have that, but I'm sure there's a lot of people listening that would love to know more about what you're up to and how they could potentially get in touch with you.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got 2 minutes, it's interesting to discuss the process of, I wouldn't say retirement because we're not retired, but that process of transition away from professional sport that we and so many other other athletes have gone through, and those that also have transitioned from one career to another. And it's, it was a challenge of my own making, but it was a challenge. I found it really hard. The lack of structure, the loss of a goal, the loss of validation that comes from training and racing, definitely questioning who I was. My identity was wedded to me as a triathlete. And so I didn't know who I was outside of that anymore because it had become all consuming. And you need to be comfortable in this new void. And I was fortunate to move on from professional sport in an Olympic year. So I published my book that year, but also was really fortunate to be involved in some commentary for the Olympics and things like that. So it enabled me to just focus on a few different things, still train quite a lot, but not have that kind of regimented 9-to-5 commitment that would have been so alien at that time. But you've really got to be kind to yourself. And it's not woe is me. Like I said, it was a transition of my own making, but it was psychologically really challenging to find out who I was and what it was that I was passionate about and where I wanted to focus my efforts. All I knew was that I had Tom by my side, and that was incredibly important. I knew that I had skills and experiences and qualifications from before, but I didn't know how to apply them. And you need to start that process again, like I did, way back when I graduated from university, that process of introspection and questioning and reading. And I realized that what I wanted to do was combine my 2 passions, which are physical activity / sport and development. And so now I work as global head of health and wellbeing for Parkrun. So it's an organization which delivers free weekly 5K events in the UK and in 21 other countries around the world. So every weekend, COVID aside, 300,000 people take part. They walk, they jog, they run, they volunteer at these events. And my role is to develop interventions to engage those that are less active in those events. So professionally, that's what I'm doing. And personally, very much focused on, our family and bringing up our daughter. Both Tom and I work 3 days a week, so we have that nice balance between family and career. And it's, a real blessing to be able to dedicate that time to her that I wouldn't have had otherwise. I don't think, especially before she starts school in September. And then physically, I'm focusing on running mainly, Greg. In terms of what appeals, but also what is time efficient, running ticks many boxes. And I'm really enjoying the less kind of metric focused type of running. So just getting off the trails and not being worried about split times or pace or, specific kind of targeted sessions, going out there running. Sometimes I'll run really hard. Sometimes I'll do a fartlek session. Sometimes I'll run easy. A lot of it's off-road and, focusing more on kind of marathons and ultra marathons, but really, really enjoying that. But it's taken me a while. I think initially when I retired, I was too scared to throw myself into a road marathon for fear of what people would think of me. And as enough water went under the bridge, slowly I realized that didn't matter because I'm not I'll always be, 4-time world champion. No one can take that away from me, but I'm not that athlete anymore. And I know some people still look at me and think, oh, she could crack out a 2:45 marathon. I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can do a 2:45 half marathon. But I'm still relatively fit, but I'm not the athlete that I was, but nor do I want to be, nor do I want to invest the time or the energy in making that a priority. So I'll do the best in the context of my life. I'll still do some training, but I won't let it become all encompassing.
No, I totally understand that. I these days I'm happy to do a 40-minute run or I go to the gym and just I'm trying to put on a bit of muscle, but it's still funny the amount of people say, Greg, you're going to race again. And look, I may race age group in a couple of years' time, and that's really just because I love the sport, but I'm also loving just being away from the sport in the sense of I don't want to compare. I need to have 5 or 6 years where I can just get really, really slow. And what I really enjoy is I enjoy the process of getting fit. Once I'm fit, I'm kind of like, well, what do I do with it? So I'm almost, and then I get out of shape again. I kind of enjoy this little roller coaster. I know that sounds weird, but it's kind of like I enjoy the process of getting fit and getting stronger. But Chrissie, this has been absolutely fantastic. And again, this has been a long show and I don't want to keep you any longer. Thank you so much for joining me. And everybody, thank you so much for listening. I'll put links for Chrissie's book and the park run in the show notes, which you can find at bennettendurance.com/media, which will all come out and you can sort of, that'll have timestamps and everything else as well through it. But Chrissie, again, thank you so, so much for joining me.
Thanks a lot for listening to Be With Champions. If you enjoyed the show, your support would truly be appreciated. You can visit the Be With Champions Patreon page, or you can subscribe with your podcast app of choice. Don't miss the next episode, so subscribe and be notified. For show notes, if you want to know more, please visit bennettendurance.com. I'm Phil Liggett, and on behalf of Greg Bennett, here's to the next time, and I hope you will join Greg again very soon.